Okay, so here's what I thought I would do is this. If we look at what really, and by the way, I'm Mike. Hi, I'm Mike from MikroRail. Okay, if you really take a close look at what an I-beam and the function of an I, or not the function, but the makeup of an I-rail, it again always comes down to, almost always, is because there's probably going to be exceptions, a flange at the top, a flange at the bottom, and then a web. And almost everyone's going to be like that. Now, some of these, a lot of them, in fact, the web is going to be really tall. It's going to go way up. So it could be it could be part of a building, even, like 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet high, right? But it still ends up having a flange at the bottom, flange at the top. The same thing with railings and all kinds of other stuff. So it's this combination of things that makes what I would have been dubbing as the MikroRail, right? Okay, so now for those of you that have been watching this or checking out the other ones, you see that I make a dado down in here, the groove for tongue and groove joinery. I've been making that with a shaper. Now, not everybody owns a shaper, right? I'm thinking not very many people own a shaper that are hobbyists. Anyhow, so there is a way to make these without a shaper. So it's one of those things I could probably make camping without any problem. And that's the way that I would do it if I wanted to make something like this while I was on an RV trip, right? Now, the way to do that is to, instead of cutting the groove down in here, is we'll actually add a 3/8 inch piece of material to both sides of the flange. And that'll create the exact same function. It'll take a little more time to do it. But we can also make it look good, and there's a couple of other things that can go on. So it is going to involve multi-board glue-ups again, so that's why I'm showing it on the micro bench, which is all set up to go. But that's what it's going to amount to. Now, then with the web itself, we can do just the opposite. We can add this tongue onto that. Again, none of this is going to be as strong, so if you're looking for strength and big and all that, then you'd almost want to go to a shaper, or at least for the groove have a 3/4 inch dado blade. It's usually a stacked dado blade in a table saw, because that's a pretty decent groove, right? You could do it with a router, easier with a router table. You could do it with a handheld router, but again, it might take multiple passes. That's a lot going on there, 3/8 inch deep by 3/4 inch wide. So, okay. But that said, it's a way to do it, at least if you don't have that kind of stuff. And again, the strength is not going to be the same as if we'd made this all out of 3 pieces with a shaper and so on. But what we can do is then do just the opposite of what we're doing here. Instead of adding a 3/8 inch piece here to create the dado on the web, what we would do is add a 3/8 inch by 3/4 inch piece here. And I'm going to demonstrate how to do that. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this. What I want to basically do is get this point across that you don't have to have a shaper to do a lot of the projects that I'm talking about in this Instructable. Because if you really want to, especially on the lighter duty stuff, is you can go to this method and then see how it all works out for you, and hopefully it does. Okay, so as always, the place to start is using the formula, right? M plus T plus J equals P. So the M, the materials, are usually going to be in my lean, where I'm trying to burn up a bunch of scraps anyhow, so this will be a perfect project for that. Okay, so what I'm looking for in here is, I'm going to use the very first prototype, which was the baseline, right? Because that's the place to start. So 3 inches by 1 inch, 3 3/4 by 1. Those are the places to start when we're doing anything the baseline wise, right? But we want to come up to 1 inch rather than starting with 1 inch in order to end up with a 1 inch dimension. If we're going to be stacking something on it, like right here, I'm going to stack a 3/8 inch piece. Then that means that we actually need to drop down and want to find 5/8 inch parts. Now, I don't know if I'm going to find 5/8, but if I find some 3/4, then I'll just run it through the planer, bring it down to 5/8. So by the time I add my 3/8, I'll be at 8/8. And that, to me, the math comes out to 1 inch, right? The same thing with the center part here. Now that one, I'm going to stay with 1 inch because that's the baseline. It's 1 inch across. And the height, though, we'll take care of that later. I want a total of 3 3/4 to make the exact same thing, the baseline. But to get to 3 3/4, I'm going to have to knock that down because we're going to be adding material on both ends. So that's what I'm looking for in the hunt right now. Okay, so I already found the material for the 2 rails. It's some very hard maple. It's already almost exactly 3 inches. I can take a little bit off if I want, but it's also only 3/4 inch wide. And so I'll plane it down to 5/8. So I got that part. Now I just need to look for the web. Okay, so this worked out pretty well. I've got some ash, and that is 3 3/4 wide. I've got it, it's 1.5 inches thick, but it's also long enough. And again, I don't want to use up my larger stuff for this. I just want to make a point here. Okay, so I got thinking, I've mentioned a couple times that there's no reason that you can't have 2 different species. So this would be a great time to do that, because then it'll make it really clear that these are 2 different pieces. They're not a dadoed, they're actually an add-on. And number 2 is just to emphasize this point that by doing multi-board glue-ups, you're able to do some stuff with multi-species. And I very rarely, if ever, use stain. I just like to go right to varnish. I just don't like staining if I can help it. Well, the only way you're going to get, if you wanted a multi-tone, is by using 2 different species. Usually like a black walnut and a maple is a really, really good mix. So I did find a piece of black walnut, and it's almost 2 inches, and it's a little under 1 inch. And so let's use that. Okay, when you get into something like this, it's like, what do you do first? You've got this long scrap here, you got a long scrap here, you got a short scrap here, and this is what your ultimate goal is to make something like that. Well, that's why I'll always do a sequence. When I draw my drawings, then I do a cut list. And while I'm doing the cut list, or shortly thereafter, I do a sequence. I write it out, what comes first. So, what comes second? Now this one here, let's just start off. I'm not doing a sequence on this because it's a one-off deal. It's very small. I've got 22 inches, so a little over 22. So basically, I'm going to cut this in half eventually to make my top flanges. And then that would mean that I'll have about 11 left. And then I have just a little over 11 here, so I'm good to go there. That'll be half of that. And then I need to get that same level of material out of here. So the place I'm going to start is this is 3/4. This must have been milled. Yes, this was sanded by some firm, or somehow or the other. Actually, it looks like me because I left that little bit of rustic on there. In fact, let's keep that. There's just a little bit of kerf on that. So I'm going to make sure that I keep that, all right? So the way to do that is I'm going to plane this down to 5/8. Well, I'm going to make sure that this is the side that hits the knives. So all of my machines are connected to dust collectors in one way, shape, or form. This one is kind of my bring it out. I connect it via an older Fine or Fiend that I have that has the automatic on it. You plug it into there, and then when you turn on the machine, it automatically turns on the dust collector. I am going to use a calipers, and what I'm looking for is 0.625, and this machine has all kinds of settings on it, like for 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4. It does not have one for 5/8. So I'll just ballpark it, and then I'll check it every time I come out. So that's what you're going to see me doing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start. 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 I'm going to go ahead Okay, on that one, I did it wrong. I went down too much. I should have not gone quite so far, but we're close enough for horseshoes and hand grenades on this. So on this piece, I've got 1.5, right? That's way too much to run through the planer over and over and over and over again. So I'm gonna first take that down to, since I like Rustic, right? I like this Rustic right here. That's the kerf, the saw from the sawtooth from the Sawyer's saw. That's a 5-inch or 5-foot circular blade. So I'm gonna first knock her down on the bandsaw. All right, I set it at 1 inch. That way I have kerf on both sides, I think. I'll have this kerf I'll retain, and then I'll make my own kerf, my vertical stuff, on the other side when I put it through. Do I have enough height? Pretty close. Maybe I have to go up a little bit, and then I'll run it. Can you tell that guy's been around for a little while? So let's see what we've got. So when I pull this off, right, what I have is that kerf that I'm talking about. Now this is the mic kerf. This is from an 1.25 TPI, a relatively decent rake type blade on an 18-inch bandsaw. So then I retained the Sawyer's kerf on the other side. And then let's just see what I ended up with. Always setting it back to 0. And we are at, drum roll here, 1.03. You're not going to get much closer than that. So I have my web. So when you're doing these I-beams, I-rails, whenever you can, if you have the capacity on the saw, try to build them first a little bit longer, and then you cut the ends off. Now you can't always do that as you get taller and taller on them, but so for right now I have 22 3/4. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to end up with an 11-inch long. So if I cut this at 11 1/4, that should give me halfway about-ish. Yep, a little bit more, right? And then the same thing with this guy. I'm going to cut him off at 11 1/4 as well, and then there's a chip on this one end, so rather than dealing with that later, I might as well do it now. So I'm doing 11 1/4, and then we'll be able to put it together, do everything, and then we'll cut it again. Okay, now this is a perfect example of why it's good to have a cut list ahead of time, because I blew it on this one, and I'm not afraid to say it, right? Okay, so what I did was I figured that this should be 3 inches, but if we're going to be putting these little rails, these little pieces in here, well, I'm going to eat up 3/8 on the bottom and 3/8 on the top, and then I won't have that net difference of 3 inches, which is what I always want as a standard anyhow, right? You can change it whatever you want for whatever reason, but remember, like my hide scraper, I want to be able to scrape in between there, and the hide is 3 inches wide. Well, I'm not going to be able to scrape this out if it's smaller than that, but I'm going to go with this. And then again, this is a prototype, and that's the reason for prototypes, but it's also, again, such a reminder, even on small projects, that it's so helpful to draw up the project and then do a cut list. And again, I did not do it for this particular prototype, and I'm already regretting it. So, but that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with this 1 inch, and then I am going to stick with the everything else that I have. I have the 5/8 inch here, and then I'm going to make these pieces now that are going to go in there. Okay, so this is where I said I'm going to use black walnut, right? Not that ash that I had in there. And so I have this piece, and those are my materials for this, the M in the formula, right? I have 1 3/4 by almost 1 inch. So I need to get 4 pieces out of this. I need to put one here, one here, one here, and one here, and they all need to be, excuse me, I think it's a cold, if you know what I mean. We are in post-COVID right now, right? So again, it comes down to sequence. What do you do first? What do you do second? I'm going to go by gut feeling on this one. My first step is going to be to cut this to like 22 1/4, which I did on all the rest of them. I'm going to cut that to 22 1/4, and then I'm going to work it down into my strips. From what I understand, you don't want to let the dogs chew on that black walnut. I'm not sure if it affects dogs. I believe it affects cows and horses. Anyhow, I'm not an expert on that. Okay, again, my gut tells me, rather than going to the bandsaw first, is to first table saw it to 1 inch. And that way I'll have less to go through the bandsaw, and hopefully that works out. So now I have my 1 inch piece. Now, of course, there's the saying, right? Don't send a boy to do a man's job. I hope that's still appropriate, but this is a case of sending a man to do a boy's job. We really would much rather have a smaller blade. It's just that I'm going through some issues right now with my other one, and I'm just going to go ahead and do this, because this is going to take quite a bit off of material, but I think I can make it. So I'm going to go about halfway on it and see if I can get that. And the way, of course, that I was always taught was to run it through, to get halfway, is to run it through once, flip it, and then run it again and see where that line is. So ended up with 2 pieces. They're both greater than 3/8. That's all I'm concerned about for right now. The rest of it I'm going to do on the planer. Now some folks might think, well, shouldn't that go on a jointer first? And if it were a larger board, yes, definitely before you plane it, right? Especially when you're looking to glue this up. To me, you know, whenever you do a glue up, it's almost always, that edge to edge is almost always going to be done on a jointer. But this is too thin. It would, to me, this would not be safe to do that. And because it's so thin, it'll bend with whatever I'm doing there. So I am not going to put it on the joiner. Again, that's just too small of a shape, too thin for me to put my fingers anywhere near that, or even a tool near that. So since this does not have a 3/8 inch setting, I took it all the way down to 1/4, and then I'm just going to back it off a little ways, and then I'll put it up there somewhere. It doesn't make any difference. And then I'm going to use the calipers from this point forward to do the same thing I did earlier to get my 3/8 basically as close as I can to a perfect 3/8. There again, close, but I actually went too far because I wanted to keep a little bit of glue room in there and some whatever. I'm going to tweak it. Again, if I was doing this for a big project, because I have access to a shaper, I would be using a shaper anyhow, and then that's all taken care of in there. But I now have my strips Again, I'm overcutting everything.